Good evening, members, and welcome to the Wine Society's International Riesling Day online event. My name is Gil Riggins. I'm one of the event managers at the Wine Society, and it's great to have you join us here tonight and spend an hour or so talking about Riesling and just delving into the delights of this wonderful, diverse grape variety. I'm also thrilled to be joined by my fellow events manager and co-host for tonight, Catherine Housen. Catherine, I can see you there. Hopefully the
Hello.
sound's also back up and running. How are you?
Good, good. I'm excited for some nice Riesling this evening.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Yes. And so, members, yeah, thank you very much, as I say, for joining us. Over the next hour or so, Catherine and I will do our level best to delve into Riesling as a varietal. We'll look at the history of the grape variety, its humble beginnings. We'll look at the characteristics of the grape, where, when, how it's traversed the globe into what now is very much an internationally planted variety. Perhaps as well, we'll touch upon what we will touch upon some of the regions, some of the traditional kind of stars, the classic stars from around the globe. And if there's a bit of time, maybe we'll touch on what the future might hold for this variety. Things of climate change and other factors are becoming a more ever-present conversation and thought in grape growers' minds and winemakers' minds. And there's lots that we see that are happening with not just this variety, but others. I can see a few of you are mentioning and saying hello to us on the chat feature, which is fantastic and prompts me to say we'd love to get your interaction and your feedback throughout the course of the event. Do please interact with ourselves, Catherine and I, but also each other using that chat feature. To help us with tonight's event, we've selected four wines, hopefully four wines that show the diversity and range that Riesling has. So we have a wine in order in terms of how we'll taste them. Anyway, Catherine, we have from Germany, from Australia, from France, and from New Zealand. And maybe a few of you are joining with one or more of these bottles yourselves as well. Or perhaps you've pulled a bottle out from your wine rack, your cellar, your fridge. Whatever it might be that you have in your glass, we'd love to hear what it is. We're very nosy, very interested in what people are having to taste alongside us. So do please let us know what you've got. And also what your personal journey is with this great variety. Maybe Riesling, you're brand new to the varietal, you're joining tonight hoping to get some new information and to uncover a little bit of information about the grape, perhaps start that journey of your adoration for it. Maybe you're a seasoned Riesling vet and any excuse to open a bottle or two is welcomed in your household. Whatever it might be, do let us know via the chat feature. If you have any questions for Catherine and I, for our benefit, amongst anything else, do please pop that into the Q&A feature here on Zoom. That just means that it's far more available to us. We've got more chance of being able to read that and hopefully being able to answer the question for you rather than it potentially being lost in the thread within the chat. Final bit of housekeeping, and hopefully this doesn't come to be, but if you do suffer, if you have any technical difficulty, any communication issues, we're not IT technicians, Catherine, I think it's fair to say. You perhaps actually better than
No.
I, but we're not. We'll do our best to help resolve that issue. You can get in touch with us one of three different ways. You can email us, tastings@thewinesociety.com, or within Zoom, you can chat to us. You can direct message us via the chat feature, or you can click on the React tab, which is that heart tab at the bottom, raise your hand, and that'll pop up on our screen, and we'll message you. So that's the introductions. That's the kind of premise of tonight's event, and obviously a little bit of the housekeeping. But let's start to delve into this grape variety Riesling itself. And before we start looking at any of these wines, members, don't wait for an invitation to taste wine. If you have something in front of you, do please dig in. Let us know. You don't have to wait for us to have our first sip, or for me at least to have my
Don't
first
worry,
sip.
I've had
I can see
most of my first sip,
you've already
so
gone. I've got them in the glass.
if anyone
But
else has started, you're in
quite
good
right.
company.
Quite right. But let's have a little look at the history, the kind of origins of this grape variety, and why, I suppose, a question that we might be asking ourselves, why today, why now are we looking at this variety? It is officially International Riesling Day. That isn't something that we've just sort of coined. Wines of Germany trade body a few years ago, after extensive research, looking through the archives, found that the very first written evidence of Riesling, spelled Rieslingen, so not in the modern spelling, was from the 13th of March, 1435. So we're sort of celebrating its birthday, perhaps, or certainly that kind of when we first see it mentioned. And it's mentioned by a cellar master in a winery just to the west of Frankfurt in Germany, a region that we now call Rheingau. So we can fairly accurately state that Rheingau is the origin or the source of Riesling, and certainly Germany is definitely. And we start to see from that point, from 1435, within the next 2 or 3 decades, we start to see it mentioned further afield. So in Mosel, also in Germany, but slightly more to the west and a little north, we see it in 1465. We see it in Alsace as well, recorded. The Duke of Lorraine was extolling the virtues of the wonderful Rieslings of Alsace in 1470s. So we've seen the grape variety kind of distributed across Germany, across the Palatinate, and across the region in those 1400s and into the 1500s as well. And I think that part of the reason why it started to really take off and was planted in quite quick, that sort of 3, 4, 5 decades is a fairly swift time that we start to see this written, is in no small part the sturdiness. I think, Catherine, it's a very hardy grape variety, very frost resistant, can withstand these really cool climates that we get in the Rheingau, in Mosel, in this area. We're very north in terms of away from the equator. We're at the kind of northern boundaries of certainly the traditional 30 to 50 degree latitudes in terms of that sort of sweet spot of grape growing, certainly at this time, 1500s. So a very reliable grape in that respect, very sturdy and could withstand. I think that very much played its part in how successful it was, alongside, of course, some of those very pleasant aromatic fruit profile that it gives. A little bit more on the characteristics, perhaps we'll talk about in a moment. But outside of Europe, we see Riesling pop up in Australia for the first time in 1838. So the 1830s was a time where lots of cuttings from Europe were being brought across to Australia, and particularly New South Wales around Sydney. And it's 38 that we see Riesling planted, and it quickly took over really in Australia from a white grape variety perspective. It wasn't until the 1990s when Chardonnay eventually overtook. Up to that point, it was the most important and the most widely planted white grape variety in Australia. Hence why, as well, we felt very much the need to show an Australian version of this grape later on. We see it in New Zealand as well in the 1970s. So that beginning of really the modern wine industry in New Zealand. It was right there at the very beginning in the 1970s when it really started to take off, and it showed a particular penchant for the relatively cool climates of Marlborough. Again, a wine that Catherine will introduce us to and discuss at a bit of length later on in the tasting. We have a wine from Marlborough too. Have I missed anything there in terms of its directions? Any history
No,
I've
no, I
forgotten
don't think
about?
so. I mean, I think it's interesting having a quick look through the chat of it seems that there's some definite die-hard Riesling fans there. But
Excellent.
one thing, obviously, Roderick has mentioned that his wife doesn't like the petrol smell. And obviously, we'll come on
Ah,
to
yes.
the different aromas because obviously depending on where your Riesling is from and the age of your Riesling particularly, it can present in different ways. And also Colin has made me very hungry by saying that they've got their three Rieslings with a Thai seafood curry.
Oh,
Now,
yes.
I love talking about food, as I'm sure members, it's not news to you, but also one of the things that I think that really highlights the variability of Riesling and its adaptability is how well it is placed to pair with varying cuisines, influenced by the varying regions that it is produced. As well as, we joke in the industry and the trade that, the Riesling is a favorite of anyone that works in wine. And I think it is because actually there is so much variety. It can be a favorite because we don't have to choose. You can go bone dry all the way up to lusciously sweet. It can be involved in sparkling wine as well. It gives a lot of opportunity for different things for different occasions. And it's easier to have a favorite when there are multiple options.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think there's a lot to be said, a lot to be celebrated about Riesling, and I'm really pleased that there's an International Riesling Day. So yeah. Oh, there's lots of people having it with cheese as well. I'm so hungry.
Excellent. I have no food in front of me.
No, I should have got
Um,
some snacks.
but you mentioned there, as you're quite right, in terms of all the potential options, I suppose, for a white grape variety like Riesling, they're all available. From
Mm,
that it's naturally very high in acid. Regardless, it prefers more of the moderate and cool climate. So it's kind of average, what are we, 18 degrees sort of temperatures sort of across the growing season, not particularly warm, but it retains that wonderfully bright, high acidity, and that makes it beautiful and possible for sparkling wines. But yeah, right the way through with that frost resistancy, with that hardiness, and the fact that it's a late ripening grape variety as well, we see lots of expressions of this more into that riper, sort of sweeter end of the spectrum in terms
Yeah.
of profile, with that late harvest and leaving to hang on the vines that little bit longer to gain a bit of extra complexity and richness, and possible a bit of sugars, but certainly into sweet wines, which we'll touch upon as we look at a few of these wines in a few moments. But yes, lots of variety. Another thing that I think is very important with Riesling is it very much speaks of where it's grown. It is one of those varieties that shows the terroir, it expresses the area it's from, which is why you can get such a range across the globe. And again, as you say, there's got to be a Riesling for everybody because there's such a vast, diverse range of styles out there. Uh,
Yeah.
Amazing. So you mentioned about that petrol. That's something that should we talk about sort of a bit about that now, I suppose, because Riesling's a very aromatic grape. We have this wonderful kind of white blossom, very floral characteristic we tend to find in a lot of sort of, if we're generalizing, a lot of Riesling, but lots of citrus, lots of green fruit. But that petrol probably is one of the most important characteristics that we often refer back to, whether positively or negatively.
Yeah, I suppose it is a perhaps if you're doing it as a blind tasting as well, particularly, it's one of those signifiers of being able to kind of pinpoint the variety. Um, just before we do, there was
Mm.
a little comment from Angie about the order of the tasting. So to just to confirm, we'll be talking about the are you going Germany first, Gil?
Yes,
Yes.
Germany,
Germany
Australia.
first, Australia, Alsace, and then finishing up with New Zealand.
Yeah,
Um, but yes, do
absolutely.
feel free to dip into your wines already if you would like to. Um, but yeah, so Gil, if you want to carry on a bit about that lovely
The
petrol
petrol.
nose you can get.
Well, you mentioned that a lot of the, it's through aging or aged Rieslings. We typically sort of thought. Certainly, I remember when I started out in the wine industry, and far too long ago for me to mention how long ago that actually was. But it was very much that the aged Rieslings brought in that petrol, kerosene kind of character. It's a chemical compound within Riesling. I'm going to shorthand it to TDN because I can't pronounce its actual chemical name. But TDN sort of is what it is, and it absolutely is something that becomes more prominent as a wine ages. But we're seeing it a lot more in young Rieslings, in particular from warmer start, more of those moderate, sunnier plots, perhaps maybe in the southern hemisphere, like New Zealand and Australia. And we are now also starting to feel that alongside the aging process that develops it, actually it's sun exposure as well. So it's quite an interesting characteristic that is quite unique to Riesling. And as I say, it's not for everybody. I quite like that. I wouldn't necessarily describe it as the kind of forecourt of a petrol station, but I quite like a little lick of it in the
Mm.
wine. And maybe we'll see it in a few of these wines tonight. But it all comes from that chemical compound, a little bit of that sun exposure, but also aging. Yeah.
Yeah, I've just popped it in
There you
actually to
go.
the chat because I
Do you
also
want to pronounce it?
I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it. There's a lot of vowels and consonants in there. But yeah, it is that it's interesting, isn't it, um where it's one of those scents that is such a signifier of a variety. I suppose in some ways it's similar to when you look at things like a cava and you've got a Morello and it's got that slightly grubby, like soily scent to it, or you've got perhaps like a Nebbiolo and it's got like that real kind of violets. It's one thing that if you like it, it's a real wow, okay, I can smell a little bit of petrol. I know my Riesling is coming into some age, or it's got that level of complexity from the winemaking. But it also can be a bit off-putting. Um, so yeah, I mean, Peter's mentioned that Riesling for everyone, there isn't one for his one. Do you know what,
I
Peter?
tried
There's
really.
so many Rieslings. We will find one for her.
That's a mission. That's now a challenge for us to accept.
Yeah.
Um, so I've got a question here as well, just coming through. Why do we see it in younger Southern Hemisphere wines? Um,
There
yes,
is an idea that the warmer vintage, then the more like exposure to the sun, the warmth can amplify the aroma.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, when you're seeing, although the southern hemisphere regions are still within that slightly cooler climate, or there is diurnal range, to retain the acidity because there is the warmth. You can see a little bit of a amplification of the aroma there.
You know, and Marlborough in particular, whilst it is, it is a kind of relatively cool climate region, it's got very high sunshine hours, which does make a claim for that. And I often find it in a lot of young Marlborough Rieslings in particular. And as I say, I quite like it. So I delve into those wines a little bit more frequently than perhaps others.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Right.
So shall we go on to the first
Let's
wine?
let's do it. So, our first one, I'll tell you what, let me see if I've got the slide to share, because I forgot to show this beautiful little slide of what Riesling actually looks like on a vine. Can you see that?
Yes.
Excellent. So, the first couple of slides are exactly that, just a nice showing of what Riesling looks like on the vines, and they're quite sort of tightly bunched together, which actually makes them very susceptible. They are susceptible to botrytis, this noble rot for sweet wines. We'll talk about more so with the Alsace wine a bit later. But I just wanted to show a couple. I just like a great shot of any grapevine. That's fantastic. But there we are. That's our Riesling. Let's now focus. As I mentioned at the beginning, Riesling is a German grape variety that originates in the Rheingau. Hopefully, Catherine, you can see my cursor kind of hovering or circling this region.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Members, hopefully you can see that as well. So this is the Rheingau. This is the origin, the home of Riesling. And it's actually, take a look at Germany as a whole. It is the flagship grape variety for the entirety of Germany. I believe it's something like 78% of all vineyard plantings are, or sorry, 40% of all the global plantings of Riesling are in Germany. So it's an incredibly important grape variety across all 13 named regions, but Rheingau is very much one of the most important ones. And we can see from the image here, hopefully, that the River Rhine itself, which I will bring here, so it snakes around a little bit, but it's heading northwards about 170 miles or so, 180 miles. It suddenly kind of hits the Taunus Mountains, and then makes that very sharp kind of western turn for about 15 miles before then it gets back onto its northern course. And it's in that 15-mile stretch along mainly the northern bank of the Rhine River. About 90% of all the vineyards are on that northern bank. That's the region of Rheingau. So it is quite a small region, wine producing region. It only makes about, I think it's something like 3% of the total wine production in all of Germany. But it's an incredibly important grape growing and wine producing region, certainly for high quality wine production as well. Lots of full-time grape growers, lots of full-time winemakers here. Wines are also bottled on a estate far higher in Rheingau than perhaps other regions where they might be shipped off for bulk production. So we are looking very much at quality over quantity in the Rheingau. And 78%, that's where my 78% comes from. In the Rheingau, it's 78% Riesling. So it's massively dominated by that. In some of the warmer pockets, we get about 10-12% of Spätburgunder, so that Pinot Noir, which is growing across Germany in terms of its favour, but massively outstripped by Riesling in this particular area. We might, members, be quite familiar with Mosel Rieslings if we're talking of Germany. We can see that just here. It's that larger area off to the west. The style of Riesling that we'd have in Mosel is probably the palest, the lightest, the highest in terms of its acidity, very delicate floral and green fruit characteristics. In Rheingau, it's that little bit warmer, certainly with that south-southeast facing aspect on the north bank, facing the equator, facing that wonderful warmth and sun as it comes through in the morning and early afternoon, and getting that reflection off the river. So if I look at the next, so here's our wine rather, but I'll come back to that. I want to just show here. So hopefully you can see the picture here. I just wanted to bring this, when we talk of steep slopes and we're looking at the slopes here in Rheingau, this is kind of what we're talking about. They're very steep slopes. It's not mechanized. This is all hand harvested. It's all painstaking work to repair, to fix the vineyard and to cultivate. And just off in the corner, just off kind of the right-hand corner, top right, hopefully we can see a little bit of the bend of the Rhine River. That reflects the sun back up into the vineyards to add extra warmth, extra sunlight, and help sort of lengthen the growing season, which as a late ripening variety, Riesling craves, needs, and it's why it sort of thrives in this region. But contrast to the styles, and I'll go back to, here we go. So this is our wine, the exhibition Rheingau Riesling. In contrast to Mosel, here we've got much more fullness of body, riper fruits. They're drier. We don't have that touch of sweetness typically that you might get in Mosel. But these are dry, full-bodied, and it's a riper fruit character. So rather than the green fruits, we still get that lemon, citrus, and lime, but I get much more of the sort of stony fruits. I don't know about you, Catherine, if you've got this in, or when
Yeah,
you.
definitely more of that that lovely kind of ripe orchard fruit. So you know your Mirabelle plum, the nice sort of ripe peach and apricot without becoming too tropical with it.
Yeah,
It still has that sort of northern hemisphere coolness to the fruit.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, it's lovely. It's quite it's that little bit more opulent than the real preciseness that you can get with some of the more citrus driven and linear styles from other regions.
yeah, absolutely. I'm also looking, as you're saying, I'm looking at our notes on here, seeing that a must with Southeast Asian cuisines.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
that Thai curry is coming back round again.
Yeah.
But I'll move across to so here is an image of, so this is Gunther Kunstler. He's the winemaker, owner, the producer of this wine for us. He's there with his wife, Monica. And he's got, well, his family, the Kunstler family, originally were for generations producing wine in Moravia in what was Czechoslovakia. His father, Frank, I'll just stop showing there, otherwise we're sort of looking at the picture. Um, his father, Franz, rather, was an incredibly gifted winemaker in Moravia, as I say, that sort of generational historical region for themselves as a family. But they moved in kind of the mid 20th century to Germany, and France really kind of took on and became an incredibly influential and one of the best winemakers in Germany. And they founded eventually, so that was quite sure, yeah, sort of maybe the 50s, 40s, 50s. And then by 1965, Franz had set up his own estate in Germany. He was working for other wineries at the time until then. But 65, and he founded this in Hochheim, which is in Rheingau. So they've been in this region from that period of time. And Gunther took over the reins in 1992. So he's been at the helm for a long period of time, but big boots to fill, but has adequately met that and filled those boots and creates wines with great precision and focus. And it's very much on quality over
Mm.
quantity and that typicity, that classic style that we hope and sort of associate with Rheingau, which of course for our exhibition range is exactly what we're looking for. These wines that are typical of where they're from and the vintage and the grape itself. I just think it's a tremendous example of a Rheingau Riesling in general, actually.
Absolutely. I think it also you know that in I say recent years, relative recent years, there's been obviously having to be a bit of a shift in consumer perception of Riesling from Germany, particularly because you've had so much of the time focused on your much sweeter, more like table wine Rieslings, you know, the days of Blue Nun and Black
Mhm.
Tower, and it's definitely was made for what people wanted at the time. But then obviously you have a slight issue in that that is the expectation of what Riesling from Germany is. And actually, this really shows the quality that you can get that was always there.
Mhm.
You know, they were still making these styles. It's just people weren't as into buying them on the grand scale. But the quality that's there, the dryness that's there, which makes a really lovely Moorish wine,
Mhm.
um, and the ageability as well, the you know the structure that you get from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that Rheingau Riesling in particular, alongside other, but certainly Rheingau is famous for the longevity, the long ageability of their Riesling. You have that high acidity, you've got that concentration of fruit, and there's a structure in the wine. This sees a little bit of, I think this sees a little oak, some large old oak barrels. So not to impart any flavour, oak doesn't tend to work very well with these aromatic varieties, as you know, but mainly stainless steel, but a little bit of oak in there as well, and just adds a touch of structure and a bit of body. And these are wines that are incredibly, suitable for aging. This is a 2020, and it's still drinking very youthful in terms of, in the glass now. It looks very youthful. This has got a few years left on it to develop, and bring those kind of, I always get kind of waxy lanolin honeyed characters coming through.
It's that lovely texture, isn't it?
Yeah,
That really that mouthfeel to it that yeah, makes you want to go back for another sip.
it does, which is a good thing, I suppose, in wine.
Absolutely.
It draws you back in for another glass.
And
Brilliant.
I think just linked to that, that might be something where Caroline has mentioned whether I think this is back to when we were talking about TDN, that kind of
Mm.
carabiner note, whether that's the same chemical that's in Suave. Now, I'm not going to say for certain yes or no that TDN is in found in Suave, because I'm not 100% sure. I don't think it is, but I think what has that similarity is where you have that textural element, that kind of that green apple skin pithiness that's slightly like bruised apple has that slightly kind of
Hmm.
petrally booziness to it. And also when you get a little bit of a sort of a white nutty note in there as well, along with your slightly astringent sort of woody herbs, so rosemary, thyme, those sort of flavors all together also share a lot of the similarities to that sort of TDN petrally note. So in some ways, just saying petrol is a little bit of a one-dimensional descriptor because there is more complexity to it. But I think that may be the sort of similarities that you're picking up in a Suave as well, because you've got that aromatic quality to it while still having some complexity. And it's not just perfume. There's a slight kind of bitter nuance that stops you. And
Yeah,
that's, yeah,
brilliant. That's a great point. Absolutely. Well, we've not got Suave on this evening, sadly, although a wonderful, wonderful region, great wines. But should we start with our first Southern Hemisphere expression?
absolutely. Yeah. So we're going to Australia. So, Gil, if you wouldn't
Yeah.
mind doing the slides for me. So this is the um, exhibition Clare Valley Riesling. It's 2024. So this is very new to our range. A new little picture over there. Yeah, so very new to our range. Um, and maybe not new to you, but the Clare Valley and the Eden Valley actually in Australia. I don't know if you can see my cursor, or as you're sharing, Gil, you might need to do
Yeah,
the wiggle
trying to
for
come
me.
over.
So
Well,
we
that's
are up. Yes, so we are north
where would you like me?
north of Adelaide.
Yeah, I'll go on
In
the big map. There we are. So on the big
there you
map we're here.
go. So north of Adelaide into the Clare Valley. And I think we've got a slightly more zoomed in map as well.
Absolutely. Here we go.
Perfect. So yes, so you see right in the middle there. So a little bit more inland, but still with pretty good proximity to the Gulf St. Vincent, to the Murray River. I think that's one of the key things as well about all these regions is that they have generally there is proximity to a water source. And there is also elevation. So, by its name, it's the Clare Valley. We're in a valley. There's going to be elevation for the vineyards. I think the Clare Valley and the Eden Valley, even though they've got the Barossa in the middle between them, when it comes to Riesling, they have a lot of similarities. Um, but Clare Valley, for me, in a way of identifying it, it really has that line of lime throughout.
Mm.
Some can be really pronounced, almost in a starburst opal fruits sort of intensity, and some can be that bit fresher, more like sucking on a wedge of fresh lime. But lime is a real particular note that you will get with Clare Valley. It does also have the sort of lemon pith, the slightly floral aromatic qualities, but you're looking at sort of like lime blossom, maybe a little bit of jasmine there, a little bit of when you smell like a yellow rose and it's got that sort of fresh sweetness. This one particularly, as well does have, I'm going to use that horrible wine word of minerality.
I knew it was coming.
I'm so sorry, but it's it is a descriptor, understandably, because it is that sort of slightly wet stone, like a little flinty. If you strike a couple of flint stones against each other, you've got that kind of, again, you're getting into the slight petrol-y note to it. It's like kind of fuel, smoke, burning,
Hmm.
while also still having a really lovely savory note to it as well. It's that sort of salty preserved lemon, which again adds to the texture, adds to the mouthfeel. It's got that linear acidity as all the Rieslings do. I think in body, to me, it's generally a little lighter than what you're getting in the Mosel because your fruits are within those lemons, limes, very crunchy, slightly unripe fruit. So either you might have a bit of stone fruit there, you're looking a little bit more unripe nectarine, so like a crunchy green gage, rather than the juiciness of a peach or apricot. So it's precise, I think.
Yeah, that's a lovely word for it, and we've got a few comments here about the acidity is a lot more pronounced. There's a lot more of that sort of bright, searingly acidic there,
Yeah.
and again for some we've got two very contrasting. One likes that very bracing sort of bright acid. For others, it's not quite what they're looking for.
Yeah.
But
And
I with Clare Valley, so with Australian Riesling, I found this sort of fascinating, or I thought it was quite an interesting fact that the variety itself is fairly thick-skinned. It's part of why it's so
yeah.
sort of hardy and durable, but in part because of the warmth in Australia, even in these cooler, more moderate climate regions that we're talking about, um, Riesling has been known to almost have sort of up to seven times as thick a skin as it
Mm.
does in European vineyards in Germany and in Alsace. Which I think with that, I don't know if there's actually a general kind of correlation, but for me, it helps with that kind of textural character and a
Yeah.
kind of pithiness almost that comes through. But you do get that very bracing acidity, especially in a wine that's young like this. It will develop.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're saying, pithiness and I think sometimes we're hesitant when talking about white wines to actually refer to tannin, but there is still that element to it, that it's not at all in the same level that where you're getting from red wines. But when you've got your slightly thicker skin, you've got the seeds, the stalks, everything involved there, you are going to get some of that slightly tannic structure as well, which just adds to the overall structure of the wine. It increases that ageability, your structure, your acidity, your alcohol level. Although this one is only 12%, and I've noticed that John's got a comment about alcohol, and I'm going to come
Mm.
back to that. Those things, along with the intensity of the flavor and the complexity, those are what we want to have a age-worthy wine. So it's to have that structure, have the intensity, and together they'll be able to leave it for some time. And also, if you've got all these wines, I wouldn't be put off by the fact that the two Southern Hemisphere options we've got are both screw top. That won't affect to the detriment its ageability at all. If anything, it might, keep it that bit more pristine. So yes, so John has mentioned that he has an Eden Valley Riesling, bone dry, searingly acidic, but he's intrigued how the alcohol content is kept to 10.5. And is it that they just pick the grapes early or more involved than that? It's, I don't know exactly for the one you're referring to, but Eden Valley, the Clare Valley, they both have in that part of Australia, they are a very warm climate, but the diurnal range that they've got is really key. So when it comes to nighttime, that temperature plummets right down, and you've got that coolness, which means that your grapes aren't continuing to ripen overnight. The alcohol is then kept low because it's the ripening and the sugars converting into the alcohol that creates your higher alcohol, creates your wine. Because of that coolness, that's not happening. And when you've got the elevation now, obviously there will be winemakers that also want to mitigate that by picking early. Some may pick at night, um, because you've got that later ripening as well. Um, it is something to kind of keep an eye on. There may be some winemakers that will be a little bit more involved in keeping their alcohol levels low, or they may take measures to reduce them slightly if they, want to. That's not an automatic comment on quality, but one of the key things is that big diurnal range, the ability to have a really cool night, which we're all experiencing at the moment, in spring in the UK. But unlike, Australia, we've also got very cool days, but they have those lovely warm days, get that ripeness there, and then it's almost like the grapes have a little sleep overnight and they can keep themselves lower in alcohol and high in acidity.
Yeah. The other thing as well, and again, this might not be necessarily related to the particular wine that's mentioned there, but I don't think I mentioned at the beginning. Another feature I think that was part of why Riesling was such a popular variety, way, I'm talking back in the 1500s, was unlike a lot of different grapes, it's got the ability to create a kind of flavor intensity and that kind of typical characteristic, the flavors that we associate with at fairly low sugar levels and sort of lower in the ripening of the grape. Most grape varieties don't start to really take those characteristics across those signature flavors until much later. But Riesling is one of those that starts to develop that earlier on. So it could be that picking early, it's still ripe and it's still got all those lovely characters.
Yeah.
But as you say, it's not had the sugar levels haven't increased to a point that when fermenting to dryness, you're at 12,
Really.
13. You're in at that
Yeah,
sort of 10 and a half. So it's another point of sort of difference, I suppose, with Riesling than other grape varieties.
absolutely. And just before we go back to the Northern Hemisphere, just a little bit about where this one is from, as in who makes it. So the producer behind it is Cole McBride, and you may know him from his Some Young Punks label, but this is actually from the Adelina label, which is um, a winery producer that he works with. Jen Gardner, that's it. Jen Gardner, and it was from her parents actually, Will Gardner and his family. So in the 80s, the family estate in Clare, that they were making wines, and then Jen met Cole in 2001. They were both studying at university, studying enology. They've both got very detailed backgrounds in winemaking from not just from a hands-on vineyard perspective, but from the actual nitty-gritty, science behind it as well. They've both got PhDs in oenological related fields, and it's they're well positioned to be making these wines. So Adelina was originally kind of focused very much on sort of Shiraz, Grenache, Pedro Jimenez as well. Um, and these were way back in the early 1900s, so 1915. And where they are in the Clare Valley, they're actually in the Spring Farm sub-region, which, if you're familiar with the Wendouree Road area and producer as well, they are kind of side by side. So it's a very important area, an iconic area of South Australia, and there's a lot of historically relevant wineries. So they are in very good neighbour company. But yeah, so they produce their wines. They do still focus on those red varieties, but the Rieslings as well, because of recognizing the Riesling that can come out of the Clare Valley. It's definitely something that they thought we're onto a good thing, and to be able to be working with these producers. I think this is the first time we've had a Clare Valley exhibition
Yeah.
Riesling under our own. And again, it's a recognition of the shift in preference in what people want to drink. And interesting, Keith, as well, you're saying that the Clare Valley is a bit less focused than the Rheingau and less obviously Riesling. And there was also a comment from Andrew about it being slightly more familiar to a Gruner Veltliner. And I
Mhm.
think that is, I'd say that's true. Um, because it doesn't have as much of the perception of what Riesling is from the kind of the historical view of the more riper stone fruit, the slightly earlier Heredine petrol notes, that
Mhm.
kind of hay on development. It is very much more in that savory, complex, mineral, citrus driven. But I think if you were to, you may already be doing this, but if you were to line them up, try them blind. You may not be trying them blind on a Thursday evening, that's quite an ask. But if you were to line them up and taste them, one by one, and to pick out something that is a similar note in all of them, there would be across the board that continual thread of Riesling essence that I think, comes across. You've still got the floral, the citrus, the stone fruit, but that's almost like your line. And then depending on where you are regionally, whether you are German, Australia, Alsace, where we're going to go to, New Zealand, you've then got slight offshoots. So your stone fruit for Australia becomes, like we mentioned, a nectarine, for Clare Valley, nectarine, whereas Mosel, you're looking into peach. It's a family of flavor profiles that have a commonality between them. So yeah, I think
You're quite right as well. Tuesdays are more of my blind tasting day than
yes,
Thursday.
yeah.
I don't know about
Wine
yours.
tasting on Tuesday,
That's the way forward.
4 Rieslings on a Thursday.
Riesling typically features, but yes. Brilliant. Thank you. Cracking stuff. That love that. Should we head back to the Northern Hemisphere then? Let's
Yeah,
return
let's
to
absolutely.
somewhere near its home, near its roots, because the third wine we're looking at, I'll bring up the map very quickly here if I can. Let's see if it works for me. Because we are looking at Famille Hugel's Riesling Classic from Alsace. So here we go. Right, brilliant. My map of France. So we've got the German border across here, as you can see with the cursor. France, as we know, has a plethora of great wine producing regions, all very specific grape varieties grown, and local varieties and indigenous varieties to France. But we are looking right up here. Where's my cursor gone? There we go. So we're looking at this kind of dark green, sort of limey color strip, quite a thin, narrow, but very long region. This is Alsace, right on the border with Germany. So its vineyards face Germany on one side, on the other side just where my cursor is now. So running along here, and I'll zoom in with another close-up map in a moment. But here we've got the Vosges Mountains. So if I do bring, here we go. If I bring this in, because the Vosges Mountains play a critical role in the viticulture here of Alsace. Um, it is very high, it's far north, as we can see from the first map. We are, you know, again pushing those sort of outer limits and boundaries of far away from the equator and the coolness of the vineyard here to gain full ripeness. But rather than that big river system that helps reflect the light back on or the sun back on and slows the growing season by emitting a bit more warmth throughout the course of autumn, here we have this Vosges mountain range, and it acts as a bit of a rain shadow, and it sort of stops all of the rainfall that's coming in, attacking from the west of the Vosges Mountains, and a coolness, the cool breezes. So actually, even though we're this far north, Alsace is one of France's driest and warmest of wine producing regions. Um, and because of that protection, again, the area has this wonderful long growing season into autumn, dry, sunny, and warm, perfect for Riesling. And it is the only, to my knowledge, it's the only not traditionally French grape variety that would be classed as a noble variety of France.
Mm.
I think that's right, and I think that made sense. Um, but it's of huge importance to this region. It's not the only grape variety that is important here. There's sort of four noble grapes. We have Pinot Gris, we've got Gewürztraminer and Muscat are the other three, but Riesling very much is a hugely important grape variety. And this area here, I'll keep the map up just for one more moment. We've got the Oran region here. So these higher elevation in the foothills of the Vosges Mountains, where we really see lots of the small pockets of high quality Grand Cru vineyard sites, and where the highest quality sort of production, generally speaking, comes from. And it's there that we have Famille Hugel, the producer for tonight's wine. And here it is. This is our half bottle. I've got it here. I'll just show. I don't know if that's coming through, but a half bottle of Riesling Classic. I'll talk a bit more about the wine in a moment, but typically the style we might expect from Alsace is a little bit more like that Rheingau style. So we're talking fermented to dry, a full body, rather than that lighter style. Still a bit of floral, but lots of that green and citrus and stone fruit profile on that kind of broad scale. Um, and this particular vintage, actually 2022, was quite a warm vintage. And I think when tasting the wine, I'm getting a lot more of that kind of riper fruit profile. It's a little fuller bodied because of it. But we do tend to, if we think sweet wines with Rieslings, we think wines with that little bit of off dry and an element of sweetness, we find that less often in Alsace. The general style is that drier end. And I do, when I'm smelling this, I get a little bit of a smokiness on the wine, and certainly a riper fruit profile because of that extra warmth that the vintage gave it. Um, but to the producer themselves, Famille Hugel, I've got a wonderful picture. Again, I'm saying that like everyone will necessarily agree. I think it's a wonderful picture. Um, of here we go. Of Hugel. So they're based. Where are they based? There, remind me. Come and help me out.
Oh,
Riekveer. There we go.
yes.
Riekveer, which is a beautiful town in Oran, and this is their abode. This is their office block here, and we can see from the image we're looking at 1639. The family who get established. So they're not quite as old as the grape variety if we think back to 1435, but they're not far off it. A couple of hundred years out, but certainly a very well established. It's one of the most famous, one of the most established multi-generational estates, and certainly some of the highest quality wines are produced from Rheingau, certainly in Alsace, if not from a white wine perspective with Riesling and others, some of the finest wines in the globe.
Mm,
In my view, they produce some exquisite wine. Um, and each generation of winemaker has had a huge impact, positive impact on Alsace as a region, on the grape varieties of sort of what the world kind of expects and the world view of Alsace wines. But I suppose possibly one of the most impactful would be Johnny Ugel, who helped really kind of push these two very unique labeling terms and kind of legally defined terms for Alsace. They are quite literally the only region in the world that can use the terms of vendage tardive and sélection de grand noble. So we've got these two very unique, as I say, labeling terms just for Alsace. Vendage tardive literally just translates as late harvest, um, and it means the wines, the grapes have been deliberately left on their vines a little bit longer. So they've gained ripeness, they've gained concentration. The wines aren't necessarily sweet because of it. Something that often we think if it's Vendoche Todiv, it must be sweet. It doesn't have to be. They can be dry, but they tend to have more of a pronounced intensity to them, a riper fruit profile, more body in the wine as well. And then the last one of the two, I just wanted to mention this because it's such an important, I think, part of Hugel's history, is that Sélection de Grand Noble, which is a sweet wine classification, because the grapes have to be individually hand harvested, the berries are individually hand selected, and they have this effect of botrytis, this noble rot. So something we might closely associate with Sauternes in France, in Bordeaux,
mm,
or Tokai in Hungary, where the grapes are being attacked by this fungus, the botrytis, and it reduces them, evaporates the waters, and again concentrates the sugars, concentrates the intensity, the flavor, the acids. So you do end up with these sweet wines. Um, and so they're a hugely important producer, not just for their, but again, as I said, the quality that they have consistently put out year after year. One final slide I do have, which I've just remembered I've got, because I wanted to show again. I love a good vineyard picture. Um, and I'm not going to say this is a recent picture, but it does show one of Hugel's Grand Cru vineyard sites. But just the steepness of the slopes is what I love to sort of draw attention to here. We can see quite, that must be, as you're walking down, that particular gentleman coming down might just hope you got sure footing because that's fairly steep.
yeah, I mean, if you look at the road, I think looking at the road is a good
Yeah,
way to kind of get an idea of the steepness there. Um,
yeah,
yeah, and I think you're right as well. In talking about Alsatian Riesling, even though you can have them absolutely from the dry right up to the lusciously sweet, for me, I think the main point of difference is that they all have that opulence and
Yeah.
that headiness to them. So you are very much going into that lovely, ripe, perfumed fruit and floral notes to it. And it's quite a classy Riesling, isn't
Yeah.
it? Where, you've got the freshness, of course you do, but you can almost luxuriate in an Alsace Riesling.
Mm.
Um, and that's, talking of food, Alsace Rieslings, when you're looking at things like, fatty but delicious, belly pork, or looking at your like soft washed rind cheeses, it really comes into its own there where you've got that lovely quincy perfume. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, really delicious.
And this particular one, so this is their classic Riesling. It comes from a blend of different parcels all around the town of Rietveer itself, as an estate, as you might imagine, where they've got such a rich history from mid 16, excuse me, 1600s. They've acquired quite a few hectares over time. So I think they own somewhere like 120, 130 hectares under their own ownership and stewardship. But they also act as a negotiant. They buy grapes from high quality producers as well. So they've got a great range, but always with that mark of quality. It's always about quality throughout. And for me, and I think I've seen perhaps there with a couple of others in the chat, Hugo is one of those producers that I know whatever wine I'm picking out from whatever vintage I'm getting, the quality is as high as it's ever going to get.
Mm.
With their Riesling in particular, and I love it. I also love it in a half bottle. I quite like that too.
Yeah, a single serve, or two serves. Um, Angie, you're saying that it's rich and complex, but leaves you a little unpleasant acidity. It may be other expectations. It may be that you've potentially got a slightly tough bottle, sadly. Because I think that acidity, particularly for this one, to me, it's married quite well. So if the acidity is feeling a little bit disjointed, um, it it may be a slight tricky bottle. Um,
Yes.
or it could also be just a kind of a difference to other Alsace Rieslings you've had. But yeah, if it's feeling a little unbalanced, that sounds more like it's a a little kind of, a little fault to it rather than it wouldn't be what we would expect,
No.
particularly of of this age and the producer. Um, so yeah, drop member services note. They'll, sort that out for you.
Absolutely. Yeah, in terms back to those flavors, I think this is the first of the three wines that we looked at where I get a kind of red apple
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
character to it, and it has a wonderful richness and a texture to it, and slightly oily, a little waxy,
Yeah.
which I love. And we've got that white blossom, but also a touch of jasmine and all those sorts of those sort of
Yeah.
delicate floral characters. But for me, it's got a lovely complexity. It's got some depth, it's showing a little bit of development perhaps already as well. But
Just
yeah.
on development, I think
Mm.
just going back quickly to the Clare Valley, because I know Peter had a question about how the Clare Valley would change with aging. I think it would, I think what you would find in terms of development is that the fruit flavors would become a bit more kind of concentrated and slightly dried down. So you're getting more into that preserved fruit. The lime would go from a slightly freshness, like that fresher lime, to almost into a slight cordial intensity. You might start picking up a little bit of a honey hay note to it. But it's not necessarily going to develop in the same way as you would expect from it's not going to turn into tasting like an Alsace Riesling or a German Riesling. It's going to stay within its the flavor profile it's got now. I'm just gesturing to the bottle as if it's going to
Yes,
give
I
me
do that.
insight.
I do that all the
Um,
time.
I think as well you will get a little bit of to me, I was like a bit more of a slightly cereal kind of brittle, pleasantly mealy note that comes through with age from sort of Clare Valley, Eden Valley as well. So it's really kind of amplifying that texture
Mm.
as well to it.
Amazing. Yes.
Oh, Colin's saying that the Alsace is his favourite so far. I can see why. It's lovely.
And yes, this must be one of the best Alsace Rieslings we've ever tasted. Amazing. Yeah. I agree. Yeah, as I said, I think Hugel is quality.
Yeah,
Definitely.
definitely.
Well, I think time for our final wine. I can see you've got it in your hand.
Yeah, final wine. Final wine,
Um,
second Southern Hemisphere. Um, that's slightly more than a tasting
oh
measure.
yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry. We're talking about the Alsace wine being
Sorry, Angie.
brilliant. Yes. Now do as Catherine said, do get in touch with member services.
Yeah, and
Sort that
then
for you.
get a credit back, and then
Yes.
get another one and see how it should it should be tasting. So we're going to go on to our final wine, which is hopping over to New Zealand. We are going to Hunters. So this is the Hunters Marlborough Riesling. It is the 2023 vintage. And so Marlborough is in the north of the South Island. The two islands throws me, but it's the north of the South Island.
There we go.
And again, you have that real proximity to water. To you've got the Tasman Sea on your left, Pacific Ocean on your right. You know, there's that lovely coolness that you're getting through as well. Um, yes, so there is Marlborough. Um, it is a dry wine, but in comparison to the Clare Valley, you are getting a little bit more um, crisp fruit, but it is still perfumed. So now we're running the whole gamut of orchards here this evening. So you're getting a bit more into your sort of conference pear. There is some a little bit of peach there. There is some of that sort of yellow apple, but you're also getting a little bit of a tropical note, a slight kind of mango, pineapple ripeness to it as well, but perfumed.
Mhm.
It's not just sweetness at all. Um, and your citrus, I think, is in that slightly warmer, riper, um, grapefruity citrus. And again, you've got a little bit of that textural sort of salinity as well. And I've just had to take a sip there because Angie's saying it almost tastes like New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. Yes, I abs the see where you're coming from there is that ripe fruit, that perfumed. It's that grapefruit, I think, for me, a little bit of that tropical pineapple, almost passion fruit. It still has some slight sort of astringency to it, but you're right, the body is very different. It's got that nice, precise linear. It's fruit forward and it's very refreshing. It's one of the perfect wines for that sort of Pan-Asian cuisine. If you're having a nice like, Chinese takeaway, if you're having Thai, it's got that lovely freshness to it that really goes well with, you know, your kind of savory foods that you've got soy sauce or if you've got sort of like creamy coconut. It's just delicious. But let's talk a little bit about hunters because I think hunters particularly and Jane Hunter especially is something that you know she is I mean I like to refer to her as the sort of the matriarch of Marlborough. There she is. I mean she's got an OBE. She's massively charismatic ambassador for New Zealand wines. She started Hunters with her late husband Ernie in the Wairau Valley in 1979. And at that time, you know, the expectation of what what that area of New Zealand could do in terms of world-class wines was unknown. But it was in the early 80s that they started winning sort of international awards. And very sadly, only a few years in, Ernie was killed in a road accident, and it was in 87 that Jane became the sole owner um, with the sole owner, viticulturalist, and the managing director of Hunter's Wines. And she's really carried on the development while also championing Marlborough in general. And they do make very good Sauvignon Blanc as well. I'm going to jump slightly between Marlborough and Hunters here, but a really sort of interesting and um, remarkable fact figure for you is that 87% of plantings in Marlborough for white grapes is Sauvignon Blanc. 0.7% of the plantings are to Riesling. That's only 201 hectares. But actually, while those plantings are small, similar to the Clare Valley, Marlborough's high sunshine, they've got long, moderately cool growing season, big diurnal shift. The autumn is settled, so when it comes to sort of harvest, it doesn't add additional stress to the winemaker or to the grapes. It's suited to that high quality Riesling production across all styles. So you can go from that bone dry to the more palatably dry that we've got here to lusciously sweet, depending on, the season, depending on the timing of harvest, the desired style, whether that's late harvest styles, botrytized, and that is also where you come into the benefit of the clusters being so tightly grouped. Really does work well for those botrytized styles. Common to all, you've got that really lovely, vivid, pure fruit expression. So you've got citrus, the warm citrus. I see my citruses by color. So you've got your real lemon, lime. They're your cool citrus. You've got your grapefruit, pomelo. Those are into your warm citrus. It also has some of that lovely sort of honeyed quality, a bit of a floral note to it. Again, we're saying things that we've said about all the Rieslings so far, but there is that sort of definitive style to them. The climate does also mean, back to talking about the phenolic ripeness, they are ripe before it needs to, or they reach that without necessarily having to get to full sort of physical ripeness, which means that the alcohol levels are kept at a pleasant, approachable, lightness. This is 11.5%,
Mhm.
which when you consider other white wines from New Zealand, from the Southern Hemisphere, it's more often that you'll go into your sort of 12.5 and up, but because you've got that ability for them to reach the phenolic ripeness before the physical ripeness, they have all the qualities without having to really without the alcohol really amping up. And in terms of aging for the Marlborough Rieslings, you will take on a lot more of that sort of honeyed, slightly hay quality as it ages. With that tropical note, the fruit will dry down. Again, it'll go into sort of like a baked pineapple. You might get a little hint of creaminess as well, depending if there has been some sort of lees contact in the production. But yeah, it's delicious. I mean, Hunters as a producer as well, I think they obviously really champion high quality. They want to make sure that their grapes are at the best that they can be. And one of the things that they really do champion is biodiversity. And I think, Gil, we've got a final picture
Yes.
of their native garden, which was in 2002 that they pioneered this native garden. It's an oasis of mature dryland habitat. It's on the Wairau Plains, and it enriches their Rapara vineyards. So they've got Totara, they've got Lancewood, Kaihi trees. So all, native to the region, thriving ecosystem. It means that the sustainability aims where they're using winery wastewater for irrigation. It introduces the exotic trees for shelter, diversifies the habitat. I mean, the hunters do such great things that it's understandable that they make such great wines as well. I think if I had to choose, not that you've asked me, but I'm going to tell you, if I had to choose my favorite Rieslings out of the selection, I would go with the Hunters and I would go with Rheingau. And not just for the alliteration.
Just as you were saying that, I'm looking at the chat to see if someone has asked that, but you've
No,
preempted
I've
the
just jumped ahead. I just wanted to share.
I love just back on Hunters there because you're absolutely right. The quality, and that kind of pioneering element of in that period of time, to continue with Riesling and to really focus not just on Riesling. We know Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, absolutely with Jane, but Riesling, given how small an amount of land is sort of given over to it, and how important Sauvignon Blanc is to the region, it kind of shows that this site is great for Riesling. I'm going to stick to it because that's what's right for the. And look at the results. The quality is there,
Mm.
and I love the fact that you've got those kind of more tropical fruit profile, which is also wonderful because it's different to the other three. So it continues to show that diversity of what the grape can do. We're able to achieve that level of those tropical fruit characters that you'd associate with the riper end of the scale, and yet it's only 11.5%.
Yeah.
But that's sort of dry. So as you've said, it shows that we get that phenolic ripeness before you get the sugar levels higher. I think it's fantastic. I don't know if I could choose quite so easily. Hugo's got to be up there. I can't possibly not have it there. But I might actually agree with you on this one. I think Hunters as well, possibly, might have to get in there. But just on New Zealand, very quickly, I'm looking at the time as well, because there's another region in Central Otago that not that we're tasting tonight, but we mentioned the likes of Eden Valley when talking Australia in particular. Central Otago is another area, sort of far further south in the South Island, where there's some fantastic Riesling as well. And I think those styles are a little bit more like your Alsace versions, so dry, more of that full-bodied, wonderfully structured, very textural, long-lived styles. Would that be right?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I I think it definitely comes into the textural element to it. It's not as I'm not going to say it's not as fresh, because I think we just kind of get bogged down into semantics there. But the development and the longevity, I think you've got that real kind of um, honey hay quality that really pull you can taste it even now. It really kind of pulls through, and you've got that age worthy.
Yeah, yeah. Amazing. I'm just looking quickly as well here. People's favorites. The Rheingau is a favorite to hear for a few.
There's
Um,
also a what cheese would you pair with the
oh, I
hunters?
saw that. Yes. This
I
is a
mean,
question we quite like, cheese questions, though.
love cheese. So I mean, I would maybe go. Well, there was a comment on a soft cheese, definitely. Maybe something like slightly stronger. So we've got mild soft cheese. I would go a little stronger than mild.
Yeah. I
So
think I know where you might be
go.
going.
Well, I would maybe go so a kind of a slightly old brie that's been out, to get warm and gooey. Um, Maybe a Munster. But also if you were thinking perhaps something a bit truffly. So something because you've got that really lovely honey note and the sweetness and you know the pineapple tropical. I mean, it feels a little bit dated, to talk about cheese and pineapple on a stick, but it's one of it works
Classic.
because it does. So something like a truffle Baron Bigod or any cheese that you might want to dribble a little bit of honey on, that
Yeah.
would work really nicely. But I also think things like a creamy Gouda, that would be also really good. But Derek, you've got your farmhouse cheddar. Exactly, cheese and pineapple, delicious.
Well, no, I think what you've done there, right at the end of the session, you've given me my weekend. It's soft cheese, drizzled honey, and a nice glass of Riesling. I think that might have to be an experiment for me.
I think one of the things with Riesling as well is that you can have it through your entire meal.
Yep.
That's also one of the benefits of the different styles is that you can do a full however many courses you want with Riesling, and it will be
Yep.
delicious.
Amazing. There we are. There we have it. Members, thanks so much for joining us, for tasting along with us, and for hopefully uncovering a little bit of extra information, a little more to Riesling, a little more behind the scenes of what Riesling is, where it's come from, and certainly what it tastes like in these various regions, albeit only four that we've been able to show tonight. But perhaps this will spur on further tastings from yourself. Certainly will do for me. So for me, thank you very much, Catherine. Thanks again to you as well for your time and your expertise this evening. Wonderful to join you for tonight. Members, look forward to seeing you again, either at another in-person or online event to come, and have a great evening.
Cheers.